Welcome back, folks, to Americans for Truth Live. I'm Pete LaBarbera, president of Americans for Truth about homosexuality. We are a pro-family group, a Christian organization devoted to combating the lies and myths of the so-called gay revolution, LGBTQ. That stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and the all-encompassing queer. That's the word that they use now. And I'm delighted to have, for the second day as a guest, Laurie Higgins, who is a cultural affairs writer with the Illinois Family Institute, which is a wonderful group led by Dave Smith. He's doing a great job. We're stuck in the People's Republic of Illinois, which is a deep, deep blue, confused state, which is why all the good people are leaving. And not calling myself good, but I plan to join those masses someday. But Laurie, I think you're here for good in Illinois.
Well, I am, because there's too many family members here, but I too would like to leave.
All the good people leave Illinois because they keep raising taxes, and I think the new governor, Democrat Pritzker, is going to raise taxes some more. We're also joined here on the show by my friend Mike Heath of Helping Hands Ministry. Mike is a longtime cultural warrior, just a great guy. He and his wife, Polly, their son, Jared, produces the show, and we're just happy to have them. Mike, welcome.
Thanks, Pete.
And, Mike, I know you feel the same way about Laurie. She's one of my favorite, sorry, I'm sucking up to you here, Laurie, but you're one of my favorite writers because you are really concerned with argumentation, and you want to help not just Christians, anybody who is dealing with these issues actually make better arguments and understand why it's important. And even though it's a lonely calling.
Laurie reminds me of Jesus. John 1:1, right? The Logos is reason and word. I mean, when I read Laurie, I shouldn't compare anybody to Christ, of course, but in this sense that Laurie, like you said, she reasons well, and Jesus was called the Logos. The Logos is the word or reason, and she reasons really well. And like I said yesterday, Pete and Laurie, I've found, I've been at this 30 years on this issue, read a lot, but thought a lot about it, talked a lot about it. It's hard to find Christians who reason well on this issue. It's just hard.
Right. Yeah, people are intimidated, and but Laurie, you're not. But it's often a lonely calling. Would you agree?
Well, yes, I would agree. I mean, there's people who, you and Mike are two fantastic examples of people doing this long before I was doing it. But I was talking to someone this morning who's dealing with a book issue in her school, and I was just talking to her, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I have not heard any of the arguments you're making. I've never heard these." And that's discouraging part of this. I say to people, I respond on the basis in which an argument is put to me or a question is put to me. So if someone wants to come and use a biblical argument, I'll respond with a biblical response. But if someone's coming with a specious secular argument based on really flawed logic, that's the way I respond. If you're working in a public school like I was, it doesn't help to cite Romans, 1:26 if you're, engaging with discussions with people who are atheists. It's just not persuasive. But the good news is that everything that is truth is approachable on a number of different bases, whether it's science, whether it's just pure logic, and we need to be doing more of that.
Right. Now, Laurie, you told me yesterday, and I think we forgot to mention on the show, that you are currently in a 3-day ban by the speech police at Facebook. Tell us how that happened, because I just got off my 30-day ban. So what happened?
Well, I have I think it was 3 posts, I have used the word either tranny or trannies. And so they, remove it and they tell you violated their community standards. And one of them I put back up. But the third one, which was just 2 days ago, all I did was say, "This is a test post, folks." And then I wrote the word tranny. Nothing negative. And for that, I've been put in Facebook jail for 3 days, which means you can't comment, you can't post, and you can't use Messenger. So, but Now, I want people to understand that the left has decided that tranny is a pejorative, is an epithet, and therefore you can't use it. So what are we going to do if they decide in another 2 years, right now they will use the word trans woman for a man who pretends to be a woman? What if they decide unilaterally that trans woman is now an epithet and that is banned? This is exactly what George Orwell wrote about, Newspeak, which was not only to prohibit the use of certain words, but to prohibit even being able to think, because we think through language, to be able to think certain ideas. And that's what they're trying to do. And of course, eventually they're going to say you can't use trans women, because they already say trans women are women. So eventually,
they're going to insist on women, and they've been
right.
doing this, and they've been doing this all along. In fact, if you go back, and I've been doing a lot of reading on the early, since this is the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, the early language and the radical activists came out. What did they say? They said they would do these things called zaps, in which they would surprise a poor politician walking out of a building or something. They'd get right in his face and they'd say, "What about the homosexuals?" So they use the word homosexuals, but now the word homosexual is fast becoming another banned word, because it's too, recalls the old language where homosexuality was stigmatized, and that now they're insisting on gay. And even now a lot of lesbians want to be called just gay, because even the word lesbian is not seen as favorable in the public's eye, and they're constantly redoing the terms. And of course they create terms. We talked about George Weinberg, who was a psychoanalyst, I believe, who created the term homophobe. And now, Laurie, transphobe. Can you believe how fast transphobe and transphobia, those two bizarre semantic creations, have come upon the scene and are now used everywhere, even in the secular media, everywhere. If you disagree, you're transphobic.
No, exactly. And all they have to do is say, this offends us, this hurts our feelings, and all of a sudden now that word is off if you want to say it's like homosexual, now that will be banned. And so that's why I've kind of been using tranny. It's not because I hate people who identify as the sex they're not. It's because they don't like the word, and I don't think that they should be able to control what language. They don't get to decide unilaterally what's a pejorative, what's an epithet, and therefore no one is allowed to use it. They will keep doing it, and they will keep doing it, and as long as and until we capitulate, and they'll use punitive measures. I mean, it's the same thing that's going on with the pronoun thing now. You can be fined up to $250,000 in New York City if you steadfastly refuse to use grammatically incorrect pronouns.
Right.
I mean, think about that. $250,000 if I refuse to refer to men as her or they. Even more absurd.
The problem is, Laurie, they do control everything, and so they can enact the punishments. I mean,
right.
I always wondered, if words become words, according to, if it's always being revised, even in like places like Merriam-Webster, why isn't homo-fascist used more? That's a term that conservatives use, not even all conservatives, just old-fashioned liberals, when they saw this behavior, this anti-democratic behavior by the left and by LGBT activists, where they would shut people down, scream people down, squelch speech. We said, okay, that's homo-fascist. Now we use the term, yet that term did not evolve into mainstream media use. And yet transphobic, right away, it's a word. And I can't stand the use of those words, because even if you go back, if you were to go back and do a study, and I've looked at this a lot, of the term homophobic, you would see an expanding definition of that word. It implies an irrational fear. Now it's more like strong opposition to the homosexuality. So, I mean, these words are amorphous. They are vague, and yet they become, whatever the left wants, those are the words that are used by the media. And the problem is the media is the first draft of history. The media are important, even if they are so incredibly biased.
Well, they are important, and now we're seeing on Fox News, and we have been for a very long time, that they use grammatically incorrect pronouns, because everyone's afraid of this small trans cult. And, I guess it's ideological allies. A word about transphobia, there's a movement to change that word, because they realize exactly what you've said. that phobia isn't exactly accurate because there's many people who are neither irrationally afraid or afraid at all of those who identify as the opposite sex, nor do they hate them. And so there's a new word, I mean, I don't think it's how new it is, but it's transmisia, M-I-S-I-A, and you can find it on, I think it's the Simmons University Library has a thing on it, because they know that it's just exactly why we've changed surgery, you know, from transsexual surgery to gender confirmation surgery, because they knew that the words were not exactly accurate. They don't exactly conform to the ideology.
And we know how the high premium that gay activists and trans activists put on accuracy. So that would make us transmisiacs. Or,
and,
I mean, I think we're all trans miserable in the sense that we're bothered by this oppressive agenda that's now going to actually force young girls to be victimized in sporting events. That's happening, and I want you to talk about that more. But Laurie, I appreciate that you are concerned about words. The problem is that the media becomes arbiter. And the media, this whole issue, the media are the arbiters. They set themselves up as the arbiters of what is moral, of what is right, of what are the proper words. And yet we know that there is incredible activism within the media. I've been to the conventions of the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association, which puts out a whole glossary of terms. Of course, it's activists. They are activists. Their interest is getting the most favorable impression of homosexuality, bisexuality, and transsexuality, transgenderism in the media. And so the problem is conservatives have so little influence and so little power over the language, which ends up influencing a lot of people who aren't paying attention as much as we are.
Well, what's frustrating about this is conservatives will always capitulate by saying, well, this is a tiny thing. It's just like it makes them feel better, and it's just this one word, or it's the one play in school, or it's this one scene in this one play. But the left understands the importance of language. If language was so trivial, it's so insignificant, so unimportant, then why are they so insistent? So insistent that they will pass policies fining people $250,000 for using pronouns they don't like. The left gets, and George Orwell got, language matters. And until conservatives, we don't control the media, but we can control our own tongue. So we should use language while we can.
Okay, so we were off the air. We were talking about somebody comes to you and says, Laurie, really, I mean, don't we have bigger fights to do than to whether I'm going to say you call Bruce Jenner, Caitlyn is his female identified name. If I say he, is that really an important battle? What would you tell them in a minute? What would you tell that Christian who says, why is this, isn't there more important things to worry about?
Well, I mean, that's a silly question. Of course, there's more important things to worry about. You cannot say that about virtually anything in the world. You could say there's more important things to. So that's a silly non-argument. That's one thing that I would actually say. The other is, I would just say what I said a moment ago, which is, if it's so unimportant, then why are they so insistent?
Right.
Why does it matter to them if it's really so insignificant? It matters. Language is the primary tool we have for communicating, and to assert that it has no meaning, I mean, it's absurd on its face. I don't think we need to sort of make a strong argument about it. And also, it's not just one word, and I don't know if I said this yesterday, I meant to, which is to say, dramatic cultural change doesn't happen through a single cataclysmic event. It is all these little things, this drip, drip, drip over years of ignoring all these little things, whether it's a change in language, whether it's something that's going on in public education, all these things that we do nothing about, and we rationalize based on, well, it's not that important. And then pretty soon, here we are. Homosexual, intrinsically non-marital unions are recognized as marriages now, and we're moving toward co-ed private spaces for everyone, everywhere. And this is what happens when we continually capitulate to little things along the way.
But let's face it, one of the reasons we do capitulate is relationship building, and that's what the homosexual side has done so well. I think one of the most important things in the revolution, and folks, it is a revolution, the gay revolution, now the trans revolution, all the people who write about it from the other side describe it as a revolution. But Laurie, they brilliantly manipulate through relationships. And so we see time and time again, people say, I mean, I heard Dennis Prager on the air, who's a moral conservative. He fights the left, and he talked about how he had a relative or somebody he knew got married, and he just said they got married, and he said it like it was factual, even though I know he opposes homosexual marriage. I think, we don't want to say that people are even act as if they are truly getting married if it is not a marriage. Two men cannot get married, though legally our government now says that they can. So like you're right, it's that drip, drip, dip, and pretty soon people who should know better are using language which was formulated by the revolutionary left.
Right. Well, a word about marriage for just 1 second, and we don't talk about this enough. Marriage has a nature, a big word, an ontology. It is a thing. We don't create marriage out of whole cloth. We recognize a relationship that exists, and then we regulate it. What age you can get married, if there's waiting periods, blah, blah, blah. So we don't create it. So that's why I said homosexual unions are intrinsically non-marital. Like, they can't ever be marriages. They can be marriage, as they say, de jure in law, but they can't in reality be marriages, and we have to, cling to that thought and express it. And what you were talking about how they're in relationship building, I mean, they're masters at appealing to emotion. And, I mentioned it yesterday, everyone should read the book Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, because he talked about when you have a television-based culture, it advances certain biases, he calls them, which are not just ways of interacting with the medium, but interacting with everything. It's how we think. And so now we have a culture that values emotionalism, and it doesn't value logic, sequence, deduction, coherence, any of those things. And that's why appeals to emotion are so effective. Now, I will say on the whole trans-cultic ideology and its logical outworkings, I think we do have a chance. This will eventually come to an end, number one, because it's so flat earthish, but also because real people, children, are being harmed in grotesque ways, and they're going to grow up, and some or many of them are going to talk about how betrayed they feel by the whole culture that affirmed their chemical sterilization. And I mean, it's grotesque that Christians are not speaking up about this. I mean, I become so enraged about that issue. But so we will have
describe that more, Laurie. And I do want to we are not going to forget the original article that Laurie wrote about this was about incidents in the UK where cops actually called a guy who retweeted a limerick mocking transgenderism. We'll get back to that. But Laurie, talk about what is going on with minors, children being. It's a combination of the parents and the authorities, the medical people who are pushing this transgender agenda. Describe the health risks alone on that.
Oh my gosh. The health risks, and I've written about these, the health risks are so many. I mean, they go from the chest binders that girls are wearing that are actually cracking ribs and making it difficult to breathe, to risks for cancer.
Wait a minute. Let's back up. Chest binders. And I saw a video on PBS about this where the guy was giving chest binders to his students, a transgender guy. This is, I think, a woman who is now thinks she's a man, was giving these binders. And so these are tight binders that sort of like you think of the
foot binding in China.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So they're giving them, and they're actually they're cracking ribs. These girls are wearing these all the time.
They're wearing them all the time. Actually, if you go online and research this, you'll see warnings from the organizations that sell them or other organizations that are warning people about, not wearing them 24 hours and, and how tight they're wearing. So for people who don't know, this is girls who have breasts, as girls do, and they are identifying as boys, and so they don't like this. And one of the things about the politics of this is we researchers are not permitted culturally to research what other reasons might contribute to, for example, girls wanting to identify as boys. Some of those reasons include childhood molestation. Some of those when girls start developing and they get unwanted male attention, and sometimes that's from much older males. I know this from girlfriends who were sort of early developers and became very big-chested at a young age, and they start having grown men ogling them or coming on to them. And so there are a lot of reasons why girls might choose to identify as boys. Some girls have reported who were abused as children reported thinking that if they were male, this wouldn't happen to them, and they would be more powerful and be able to resist this kind of abuse. You can't even investigate this. Instead, children are being put on puberty blockers first, which when you put kids on puberty blockers, it transforms their social experiences and makes it less likely that they will ever desist from their cross-sex identification. So first they put them on puberty blockers, then they put
that
them...
would be like testosterone.
No, puberty blockers. Puberty
Okay,
blockers are the primary one is Lupron, which I wrote about this also because about a year ago, the Kaiser Health Foundation came out and they had an article about the very serious health risks of being put on Lupron, which Lupron is used for other conditions. For example, for girls who have premature puberty, and so like very, very young ages. So they'll put them on Lupron, and also for children who it appears that they're going to be very, very short. So if you can delay puberty, it gives them more time to grow tall because after puberty, there's only a couple of years that you grow tall. So there's other reasons that they use Lupron, but now they're finding that it's causing osteopenia, which is bone thinning, and osteoporosis, bone loss, and a host of other really serious conditions. In fact, the FDA is now going to revisit Lupron. This is what the article said a year ago because they've had so many complaints about it. What was interesting about the Kaiser Health Foundation article, it never mentioned that Lupron is what is being given to these kids who experience gender dysphoria. It mentioned all these other conditions that Lupron is used. I even tried to contact them and ask them why they didn't mention that. We, of course, know why. They never answered me. So Lupron is the chief puberty blocker. But then they move on to cross-sex hormones, and cross-sex hormones, so testosterone for girls, estrogen for boys, that leaves permanent sterility, in most cases permanent sterility, and there's other health risks, but there's also permanent, like voice changes are permanent. So if boys decide to go off estrogen or girls off testosterone, their voice changes will never return. Things like male pattern baldness, the hair things, that doesn't change even if they go off the hormones. And then there's the serious risks of cancer and, all sorts of stroke, all sorts of serious risks, which you can read online, even on the websites.
I want people to go to the Illinois Family website, illinoisfamily.org. And you can see all Laurie's work there. We've reprinted a bunch on Americans for Truth, our website as well. But Laurie,
can I say one word about parents? You were talking about parents.
Yes, I mean the parents that indulges. Are they? Why are so many parents so dumb on this issue?
And okay, well, there is ignorance, and by that I don't mean stupidity. I mean lack of knowledge, because it's very hard to find the right information because it's being censored. And it's very hard to find if you go online. Parents are being terrified into thinking that if they don't affirm social transitioning and chemical sterilization and surgical mutilation of their children, that their children will commit suicide. And that is based on a really gross misreading of one particular study. And you can find this online, and actually some gender researchers, including J. Michael Bailey at Northwestern University, he wrote an article for Fourth Wave Now, which is a really interesting website, and people need to go to it if you have children who are experiencing gender dysphoria or rapid onset gender dysphoria, a phenomenon primarily of adolescent girls, and read what he has to say about suicide. It should put parents' minds at rest. They should be less worried about suicide than they are. And then, so it's lack of knowledge in that. And I also want to say the pharmaceutical industry is on this big time. Like this is money for them to put all these kids on cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers. And you've got, of course, the surgeons now who are jumping on the bandwagon to mutilate children.
And you believe, as I do, that this should not be allowed for minors. In other words, at the very least, let's let this wait until adulthood. But the whole point is they're rationalizing it by saying, no, it's a much easier transition, so-called, that's their word, transition, if I start young. So they make an argument based on that future transition, that they're making it easier. Is that one of the main arguments?
Oh yeah, and of course it is easier. But here's what they don't tell parents: the best research suggests that somewhere 80 to 90% of children will outgrow gender dysphoria if they don't socially, chemically, and surgically transition. So if you've had a little boy pretending to be a girl since the time he was 5 years old, everyone is calling the girl's name. Sometimes classmates, parents will move to new communities. Classmates don't even know that it's really a boy. It's much less likely that he will come to accept his sex, which can never change, if they've done all these things. So this is one of the huge problems with this, is that we're creating this whole, a lifetime of chemical, I call it cross-sex hormone doping. And so there's so much that isn't out there that, it's out there, but people aren't aware of it. People whose children are struggling with gender dysphoria. And now, as I mentioned earlier, we have this new phenomenon of teen girls. They're going on social media. They'll have groups of friends, girls, 12, 13-year-old girls, all of their friends are transitioning. And so, and this is really, which means they're chemically sterilized. And someday they're going to regret this. And I'll say, I say to school administrators, I've asked this question in articles, when this happens, which it will happen, are you going to hold yourself at all culpable because you played a role in helping kids socially transition at your school because you were afraid of trans-cultists?
Aren't we seeing rising numbers now, Laurie? And Jared, I don't know, have we got the Illinois Family site pulled up? I can't see on my screen, but Laurie, I think I saw somewhere they're saying now 2%. It was a 2% figure for children or students who are identifying as transgender, but the numbers are going up because of all this propaganda. Correct?
Right. And because kids are going, especially the social media, they're going on, they're seeing YouTube videos of transitions and stuff like this. And so, yes, it's growing. They have, it was some gender clinic in England. It was something ghastly, like a 4,000% increase of students coming to their gender clinic for transitioning help. So, what we've done here, what we're doing increasingly in a number of states is to say, minors cannot get medical help in helping them reject their unwanted same-sex attraction. They cannot get help, but they can get help, medical help, in helping them reject their unwanted biological sex, which is an exercise in futility because you can't get rid of it. And that's the incoherence in this. So, at minimum, we should be banning the chemical and surgical mutilation of children as minors. And I would say it should go, how many articles have we had out there saying that the impulse control part of children's brains is not fully developed until around age 25, and we're letting, and so people know they can get double mastectomies as young as 13 years old here in the United States.
That should be criminal. That's outrageous. Right. And I know there was a case in Chicago of the girl, and she was 16 years old. She had her healthy breasts surgically removed. Laurie, I want you to talk about, again, just to reiterate, because you've been at this a long time. We're sort of jaded. We've seen so much of this, but here's what's going on with the suicide, folks. These kids, they're coming to their parents and they're saying, "Look, if you don't let me transition, I might get suicidal." I feel for the parents because they're seeing this. They don't know what to do. They don't want their children to harm themselves, suicidally. And as Laurie said, that may not be a serious threat. Or maybe it is. I don't know. In some cases, I'm sure it is. But then they go to these experts, and the experts are telling them all over now, including at prestigious hospitals like Children's Hospital in Chicago, which Laurie, you could talk about, where they're going along with this entire agenda, and they're advising the parents to allow the child to, quote, transition. And I think it's just, there's not, how aware are these parents and the children of these side effects you're talking about, Laurie, with the sterility? Do they even know these tremendous risks?
Well, I'm sure, I'm guessing that they're made aware of those risks, but the superordinating risk that they're most concerned about is the suicide risk. So if you've been convinced by the culture that your child will commit suicide, that's what you're saying before, there's always something more important. That's the superordinate concern is I don't want my child to commit suicide. Of course we don't. Can I just read this because I pulled it up? If you go to
Laurie, then we're going to go but we'll have you on tomorrow because this is so important. Go ahead.
Okay. So there's an article, surprising stuff you should know about trans-cultism. I won't have time to say it, but go to the article online because I have a quote from J. Michael Bailey and Raymond Blanchard, who's a former psychologist in the Adult Gender Identity Clinic of Toronto Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And I have 4 points there that they make about suicide, and people need to read that.
We'll bring that up again tomorrow. Laurie, this is so important, and we didn't even get to the UK story, which we talked about yesterday, folks. But there's so much. I also want to talk to you tomorrow about a new poll by FIRE, which is a students' individual liberty group, Foundation for Individual Liberties and Education, about the attitudes of college students towards those who disagree with them, especially on this issue. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. Thank you, Laurie Higgins of Illinois Family Institute, illinoisfamily.org. Folks, go to that site, learn from it, read Laurie's pieces, donate to them. And Mike, take it away for Americans for Truth to support us in this endeavor, because we want to go on bringing these experts to you, because we know that in the vast majority of Western countries, getting information like you just heard from Laurie Higgins is difficult. You have to look hard for it, and it's actually being censored by the left whenever they can, and that censorship is only going to grow. Mike, are you there, Mike? Well,
sorry, Pete. Yeah,
that's okay.
Hey, I want, if you're listening live, and Pete's point about this information being suppressed is no longer true, because we're doing this. And if you're watching this live, this is just the beginning of this information being available because of the nature of the internet. AmericansForTruth.com is archiving every single one of these shows. There's 13 or 14 shows up there now, and we've hit a lot of very important topics already, and we're going to be doing this every day for 30 minutes. These are ultimately shareable resources, very easy to share on all the social networks on the internet. So the information age is great for us. The cost of distribution has been reduced very, very small, but not to zero. We need your donations. We need your donations today in order to keep producing this show. So please go to americansfortruth.com, share the video, share this video with all of your friends, and make a donation today.
And Mike, one more point. I know we're over, but I talked to a very intelligent young person, I'll say under 25. And that person said, well, why do this? YouTube's just going to censor. You're going to be taken off YouTube and you're going to lose all your followers. And I said, you don't understand. The long-term goal is we will have archived information that the censors cannot touch. And I think that's the way, Mike, you've told me that you believe it's going, George Gilder and others, it's going to these platforms, because we cannot sustain a model in which a tiny group of, I mean, here's Laurie Higgins. I have not heard a scintilla of hatred. This is a reasonable woman who's well thought out in her thinking and approaching things from a reasoned perspective, and yet they're banning her as a hater. And Illinois Family Institute and Americans for Truth have both been labeled hate groups by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a leftist organization which would purport to be the arbiters of what is good and bad and hateful, etc. And so we're creating medium, as Mike said, that's there permanently, and that's what we're going to need, because ultimately people will be able to go to our site and get tons and tons of good information that the leftist mainstream media is censoring. And I'll just end the show with this. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I just want to say, Pete, and it's so important in response to your friend saying that about Facebook, that
it was actually YouTube,
about YouTube, Facebook, which the big platforms, we are creating and have created a platform that resists that. But you, Pete, have proven that even what we're building, we need to work hard on, because you were deplatformed at the internet service provider level.
Yeah, we were deplatformed because of a radical activist named Adam Flanders, who we'll be doing shows on.
Yeah, we
need to, by the way, he just accused me of being a terrorist to MailChimp, which is our email provider. So, folks, the threats are real, and we got to end the show. But look, our mission is, our vision is that you, the listener, the watcher, would be as bold in defending God's truth, the truth on this issue, as the LGBTQ activists are in promoting their lies. And always remember that we have to defend the truth, because ultimately it's God's truth, not ours. We'll see you tomorrow. Back again with Laurie Higgins.